Okay, Chapter 20, Agricultural Economics and Policy. The agricultural industry is very diverse. Uh, you know, some commodities such as soybeans and corn, they are produced by thousands of individual farmers. Others, such as chicken, are produced by a handful of large firms. And then some farm products are very subsidized, such as milk and sugar. And others are not subsidized so much, such as fruits and potatoes. All right. And so the industry also includes farm products or farm commodities and then food products. So farm commodities are like wheat, soybeans, for example, rice, and they are inputs to food products, and those are products that are sold in a grocery store. Okay. And so the industry has been characterized by short run prices and income instability. Okay. And there are several reasons for this. There's inelastic demand. So even if the price of farm products were to increase, demand will not drop by a great amount. And then if the prices of the products decrease, demand will not increase by a significant amount because, people only eat so much a given day. So, cheaper prices don't necessarily lead them to consuming a lot more food. Okay. And there's also fluctuations in output. Some years are better than others. Sometimes we have bad weather, such as like droughts or flooding that destroy the crops, or very cold winters or warmer than natural winters. And also, there's fluctuations in output in the world market as well, and that affects the prices of the farming products. There's also fluctuations in demand. And again, this is due to fluctuations in world markets. So, in some years when the USA produces is a lower price, then demand for that product, commodity, that could be like demand for wheat, for example, increases significantly. And then other years, demand for that same product is weak and shifts back to the left. If a foreign country does not have a good crop growth that year, then they may demand more crops from the United States, for example, or vice versa. If they do have a great crop year, then they demand less crops from the United States. Okay, so we see here that demand is inelastic. So it's very steep. And let's say output goes from QN to QP. Okay, so price will go from PN to price P over here. And what we see is farm income increases. Okay, it's this whole blue rectangle here. Okay, but when farmers increase their output, and then farm income falls, it's this yellow box. And if output increases even further, then farm income decreases even more. Okay, so here we have a shift in demand to the left. Okay, and right here, output is fixed in the short run. The farmers already grew their crops, and so what we have here is a decrease in price from P1 to P2. And so farm income went from the blue rectangle to the red rectangle over here. So the long run trend for U.S. farm exports as a percentage of U.S. farm output, okay, has increased, but you can see it's been very volatile, and some years have been much greater than others due to certain factors. So demand for U.S. farm products has been very unstable. And we can also see that the prices for certain commodities, wheat, cattle, hogs, corn, have also been very unstable. It seems like the trend in long run is downward for various reasons we'll discuss in the next few slides, but it's been a very volatile downward trend. So the biggest contributor to the decline in prices in the long run of farm commodities is because of technological progress. So farmers are able to produce more commodities per unit of labor than before because of increases in capital and increases in productivity of the capital due to technological progress. And as supply increased rapidly, demand increased over time but slow. And because households' demand for farm commodities, again, is inelastic, just because prices are lower doesn't mean they're going to go buy a much larger quantity of food. There's, only so much they eat per day. And also, population growth in the U.S. has not been rapid. Okay. So what we're seeing here is supply, okay, of these commodities has increased significantly. Okay, so we're starting out here at A. Okay, so supply shifts to the right, and then demand increases, but very small. So supply shifts to the right more than demand does, and so this results in a lower equilibrium price and a higher equilibrium output. Some of the consequences include that the minimum efficient scale that farms can achieve under economies of scale has increased, and so smaller farms that can achieve economies of scale end up being bought out by bigger farms, and it's created what we call agribusiness. And these are large corporate firms that have formed through the consolidation of farms. And so there's also been a massive exit of workers, and now farm labor is only 1.1% of the labor force because of this. However, farm household income has increased, and this is partly due because there are less farmers in the industry, and also government subsidies have boosted farm income, and farm productivity has risen due to technological progress. Okay, so we can see in 1950, 15.8% of the labor force was in farming, so that amounted to about 9.3 million people. And we had almost 5,400 farms, so you can see farms, okay, have decreased. They have also consolidated, and in 2009, 1.8 million people and only 1.1% of the labor force. So you can see Cambodia, almost 75% of the labor force is in agriculture compared to the US 1.1%. Okay, so farming industry has received government subsidies since the 1930s, and the US government wanted to subsidize farms to show their support for agricultural prices, income, and output, for soil and water conservation, agricultural research, farm credit, crop insurance, and subsidized sale of farm products in world markets. Okay, so the US is not the only country that subsidizes their farmers. We also see here that Norway, farmers, almost 60% of their income comes from government subsidies. Switzerland's very high, South Korea, Japan as well. And then we have here the United States, or it's almost about 10%. So the rationale for farm subsidies is that a lot of farming incomes, especially in the past, were very low, and the government wanted to keep people in farming. And so, with very low incomes, there was an incentive to leave the farming industry to go work somewhere else. And so they would subsidize farmers' incomes in order to give them to raise their opportunity cost of leaving the industry. Also, because the U.S. originally was an agricultural based economy, they saw the family farm as a U.S. institution, and so it should be nurtured as a way of life. And they wanted to also provide some kind of insurance because farmers are exposed to a lot of hazards such as floods, insects, rots, freezes, etc., things that can affect their crop. And again, it might make farmers want to leave the industry because one year they may have a great quantity of output, and then another year their output is very low, and so it's very volatile income wise. And then they also wanted to subsidize their purchase of inputs because farmers sell their output in a competitive market, so it's low prices. However, they have to buy their inputs from monopolistically competitive or even oligopolistic markets, and so prices for inputs are quite high, and so the government wants to help subsidize that cost. Okay, so in 1933, the government established the Agricultural Adjustment Act, and basically what they said was, okay, if 5 bushels of corn can buy a shirt in 1920, okay, then today 5 bushels of corn should still be able to buy the farmer a shirt, okay. And so this has led to price supports, and what price supports essentially are price floors. Okay, it's a minimum price that a farm is allowed to sell their good, and usually it's a price above the equilibrium price dictated by the market. Okay, so this will help increase farmer income. And with farmers having higher income, they're more likely to have a profit and stay in the farming industry. And it's based on the parity ratio. So it's prices received by farmers divided by prices paid by farmers. And the goal is to have the parity ratio equal 100. Okay, so with the effective price floor, what happens is farmers generate surplus output. Okay, so they produce more than what is demanded. And this is great for farmers because the government ends up buying the surplus, so they get paid for their surplus production. However, it's a loss to consumers because they have to pay a higher price for these commodities. Also, it hurts lowest income consumers the most since a large portion of their income goes to food. There's also efficiency losses. In other words, a deadweight loss because resources have been over allocated. Also, there's a social loss because since the government has to buy the surplus, that is passed on to the public as a tax. And also environmental costs because when farmers produce more, they're usually also use more fertilizer and pesticides, and so that can cause environmental problems. And then there's the international cost as well, because then the U.S. is more likely to impose tariffs or quotas on imports of these products in order to keep the prices artificially high. Okay, so we can see if the market is allowed to reach equilibrium on their own, we would be at point B. Okay, so price would be over here, quantity here, but instead the government keeps prices artificially high so consumers demand less. However, suppliers produce more, and so that surplus is purchased by the government and is effectively a tax on the public. okay, because the government has to be taxed in order to be able to provide the government with enough revenue to buy that surplus. And then the dead weight loss is this triangle over here. So, since there's been awareness that subsidies can lead to a lot of inefficiencies, the government has tried other ways of achieving the same price that the price support does, okay, but by manipulating supply and demand instead. So, one way they try to reduce supply in order to raise prices is by reducing the amount of land that farmers can farm on. But this wasn't so effective because what happened is farmers kept their most fertile land and went ahead and sold their land that wasn't producing many crops anyways. And then they also bought better equipment, so their productivity per acre increased. So another way they tried is by bolstering demand for gasohol, biodiesel, and corn-based ethanol. Okay, and these are all types of fuels that require farm products. So, corn-based ethanol requires corn, biodiesel requires soybeans, and so, the demand for these products for corns and soybeans would increase, and therefore the price would increase as well. The ethanol program has been successful in increasing corn prices. Ethanol can be mixed in with conventional gasoline. However, this program did lead to some secondary effects, and one of them is that farmers started producing less soybeans and other crops and instead produce more corn. So the decreases in these crops increase the price of those crops, and also the prices of the inputs such as seed, fertilizer, and farmland all increased, along with an increase in demand for water since corn requires a lot of water. And with the increased use of fertilizer, there was more nitrogen that went into the streams and rivers. Okay, so some of the criticisms of parity concept is that the value of certain goods are always changing. A shirt today may not be as valuable as a shirt was, for example, 50, 60 years ago. And this is because there's been changes in technology and changes in supply and demand. And so it's kind of hard to base the price parity that 5 bushels of corn should be able to buy a shirt because the value of corn and the shirt are always changing. And criticisms of price support have included that they treat the symptoms, but they don't get to the root cause of the farming industry being in a long decline, which is that there's been a misallocation of resources. Also, that these subsidies, because in the form of price supports, were on a per bushel basis. And so, what it ended up doing was actually raising the incomes of farmers that were doing well versus farmers that weren't doing so well. The farmer that was able to produce a large output benefited the most from the subsidy because they sold their output at such a high price, whereas a poorer farmer that had a low output, benefited from a higher price, but not as much as the richer farmer. The benefits were disproportionate. And also, some of the policies do end up contradicting themselves. We do have, for example, tobacco farmers that were subsidized, even though tobacco consumption is not good for the health of people. So, tobacco production was encouraged. However, with all the health problems that consuming tobacco comes with, it raises costs due to poor public health. Government has to spend more on healthcare, and also workers miss more days of work because they're sicker. Another example is price supports. For example, wheat and corn increased the cost for ranchers. So, with someone that's raising chickens and cows, they feed chickens and cows corn and wheat. And so, as corn and wheat increased in price, then that resulted in increased costs for the ranchers, and therefore they had to increase the price of the meat that they produced. So, the farming industry has established a political action committee to further promote their interests and help increase their income. However, the more support subsidies and price support programs get, the higher the costs of those programs are. As we saw, there is a loss of efficiency, and there's also higher prices for consumers. Overall, though, as time goes on, there has been declining political support because workers have been leaving the farming industry. So it's been harder for the farming industry to promote their interests. Also, in the world markets, the industry has been characterized by tariffs and quotas, and so the U.S. has led the way in reducing tariffs and quotas. Tariffs and quotas cause market distortions, and so there has been some success in this, but recently any type of talks to further reduce tariffs and quotas has kind of been stalled. So the Freedom to Farm Act of '96 ended price supports and acreage allotments for many commodities such as wheat, corn, oats, cotton. And so farmers were free to grow as much or little as they liked. So output was decided by the market and not by the government. And the government instead gave farmers annual transition payments. And these payments were less and less as years went on. However, in 98 and 99, there's a combination of high crop production in the United States and reduced export demand. And so the prices of these products increased significantly, and the government gave large payments to these farmers in order to supplement their loss of income. The Food Conservation and Energy Act of 2008 gives 3 forms of cash commodity subsidies. So the first one is direct payments, and it's very similar to this payments of the Freedom to Farm Act of '96. And so these cash payments are fixed, and it's based on a farmer's historical pattern of production. And so they don't look at current crop prices or current output. So the payments do not fluctuate. So they are the same every year, regardless of the crop's price and total output. Counter-cyclical payments are similar to direct payments, except these payments are based on previous crops grown, and these are given to the farmer regardless of current crop production. And so what it does is it sets a target price for each commodity, and it pays the farmer the difference of the actual market price. Okay, so if the market price ends up being higher than the target price, then there is no subsidy received by the farmer because they will be doing well. However, if market price is below the target price, then the difference will be a subsidy to the farmer. And then last is marketing loans. And this is where farmers can get a loan from the government lender, and if the crop price at time of harvest is higher than the price specified in the loan, then farmers can repay their loan with interest. But if the crop price is lower than the loan price, then farmers can forfeit their harvested crops to the lender. So basically, they pay the lender back with their crops, and then the loan is considered paid. So essentially, it's a government subsidy because the lenders are from the government. Okay, this concludes chapter 20.